The night sky of Naraka Outpost Lower District was forever stained by streaks of neon and the distant glow of starship thrusters. A dozen signs flickered, half of them burned out or sputtering with half-broken wiring, casting the cramped, filthy streets in a perpetually shifting rainbow of colors. Even this late, the sidewalks were crowded with off-worlders, slug-like Khizri sliding along with a trail of mucus behind them, insectoid Tavi warbling in their high-pitched chatter, and more human-like species wearing battered cloaks. There was a swirl of voices, a swirl of body odors too intense for even the cheap air purifiers to handle. And in the corner of it all, leaning up against a steel support beam, was the human called Logan the Belt Mercer. He wore a faded brown jacket that might once have been leather, though countless laser burns and tears had turned it into a ragged patchwork. His hair fell just above his shoulders in dark strands that refused to be tamed. He stood there, arms crossed, as if the shifting crowds were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Most passers-by didn't bother glancing in his direction. Those who did take a second look usually paused in confusion. Logan carried no visible weapon. Among cutthroats, smugglers, and bounty hunters who walked around bristling with rifles, pistols, or swords, a man who appeared so unarmed stood out. Yet there was something in his eyes, an intensity, a quiet confidence, that made even hardened criminals think twice before provoking him. Down the street, half concealed by a stack of metal crates, a group of Zalorian mercenaries waited. Their reptilian eyes glinted with anticipation at the sight of Logan. The wanted posters had gone out a week ago. Word across the sector was that he was worth more credits than some entire corporations. Not everyone believed it, of course. The rumors sounded outrageous. A single man said to have destroyed a space station or single-handedly slaughtered entire squads of elite troopers. It was too fantastic. But these particular mercenaries were prepared to give it a try. They'd see for themselves if the bounty notice was real or just a tall tale. Their scales rustled as they exchanged hushed words, checking plasma rifles and warming up disruptor pistols. Oblivious, or perhaps just unconcerned, Logan uncrossed his arms and strode down the alley leading to a shabby little bar named the Drowning Comet. Its sign had only 2 letters still glowing, so it looked more like the Dr. Ning Co. E.T., but nobody was there for the ambience. The stench of stale beer and synthetic vomit wafted from beneath the half-broken automatic door. Yet, from the stiffening of Logan's posture, the place was exactly where he intended to go. He stepped inside, boots squeaking on a sticky floor that no one had bothered to clean in ages. The conversation among the patrons fell silent for a moment. A tall, wiry man in the corner, presumably human or near human, glanced up and froze. Beside him, a 3-armed amphibious creature gave Logan a wary once-over, then elbowed its friend as if to say, "Don't start trouble with that one." Logan walked to the bar counter, taking in the sorry state of the place. Flickering neon tubes provided dim light. The tables were battered scraps of metal. The bartender, an old barracks with sagging cheek flaps, spat something green into a rag and tossed it aside. "Wallaby friend?" he asked. His voice gurgled as though it came from underwater. "Something not watered down," Logan said. His eyes scanned the mirror behind the bar, taking stock of the patrons reflected there. At least half a dozen of them had the look of hired guns. A few others seemed too drunk to care about anything but the next shot of rot gut. The bartender snorted. "We only water our drinks if we're charging extra," he joked, rummaging under the counter. As he poured a dark, viscous liquid into a chipped metal cup, his eye stalks darted back and forth. He sensed the tension in the air. Everyone in the bar seemed to be paying attention to the newcomer. Carefully, the bartender slid the drink across. You sure you want to be seen here? Word is, some folks are looking for a man named Logan Mercer." Logan offered a thin-lipped grin. "I've heard that rumor too." He took a gulp. It burned worse than battery acid, but it was real liquor, none of that synthetic swill. He breathed out, letting the searing sensation wash over him. Then he heard the sound of chairs scraping on the metal floor behind him. In the mirror's reflection, he saw 4 heavily armed individuals standing up. He recognized the glinting scale armor of the Zalorians. "Mercer," hissed one of them, voice carrying across the bar. His deep-set yellow eyes locked on Logan's reflection. "Our clan seeks the bounty. Perhaps you'll come quietly?" Logan didn't bother turning around. "Do you see a weapon on me?" he asked, casually swirling the drink in his cup. The Zalorian's lips curled back in a grin, revealing rows of small, needle-like teeth. "We see a fool who's let his guard down." The three other mercenaries raised their rifles. Silence swept across the bar, the kind that made lesser men's hearts race. But Logan's pulse remained steady. He put the cup down. "Then maybe you're the fools." In one fluid motion, he stood and twisted his torso to face them. He didn't reach for a gun. He wore none. Instead, his left hand went to the oversized buckle at his waist. It gleamed under the neon lights, a metallic rectangular plate covered in micro-etchings and tiny embedded wires. The bar patrons who paid attention saw his finger press something at its edge. Immediately, the buckle snapped open with a pneumatic hiss, and the belt itself seemed to come alive. A set of braided cables extended from the leather strip, snapping into a rigid formation that shimmered with electric blue energy. With a flick of Logan's wrist, the belt unfolded into something akin to a sword. The edge was impossibly thin, an energized monofilament that crackled in the smoky bar air. The first Zalorian fired his rifle in panic. The plasma bolt seared through the air, heading straight for Logan's chest. But Logan swept his newly formed blade upward, the monofilament weaving in a blur. The bolt struck the edge and splattered off in 1,000 sparks, scorching the ceiling. Another mercenary roared and lunged forward, brandishing a shock baton. Logan sidestepped with snake-like speed, pivoting on one heel. The monofilament blade glowed bright as he slashed downward, cutting across the Zalorian's midsection. The reptilian alien froze, mouth agape, as his torso slid away from his legs in a shower of crimson fluid that spattered the sticky floor. "Son of a!" exclaimed a third mercenary, stumbling backward. He tried to raise his rifle again, but Logan was already closing the gap. The blade hummed, leaving a faint trail of sparks behind it. In one savage sweep, it passed through the mercenary's entire chest, cracking his armor like cheap plastic. He died without so much as a whimper, eyes wide in shock. The final Zalorian hissed, dropping his rifle in favor of twin vibroknives. He darted in close, thrusting the humming blades at Logan's torso. Logan angled his belt weapon, blocking the strikes with a metallic clang. Then he pressed another hidden button on the buckle. The sword's monofilament edge retracted, shifting into a segmented whip that glowed neon blue. He lashed it out, and it coiled around the Zalorian's neck. A terrifying sizzle cut through the creature's growl as the whip began to burn through flesh. 80,000 for your head, they said. The Zalorian choked, trying to free himself. "I guess that's worthless now." "Guess so," Logan replied. A twist of his wrist tightened the whip. The Zalorian's scaly head parted from his shoulders with a grisly pop, and the body collapsed in a heap. Blood sprayed across the nearest table, eliciting gasps from the few drunk patrons who hadn't already scrambled away. Logan allowed the whip to flick the severed head aside before retracting it into the belt. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned back to the bar and tossed a small credit chip onto the counter. For the damage. The bartender regarded him with wide, fearful eyes. The barracks' gills fluttered in panic, yet he managed a nod. "Why, you're Mercer," he said quietly, glancing over the carnage. Word is you took out an entire frigate by yourself a month back." Logan shrugged, adjusting the belt until it clicked back into place at his waist. "Some stories get blown out of proportion," he said. He spared a quick glance at the scattering of limbs and gore. "Sometimes they don't." He walked out as calmly as he had entered, leaving the spectators trembling in the aftermath. By the time the door hissed closed behind him, the entire bar had erupted into hushed whispers and frantic attempts to identify the bodies. Outside, the neon-laced streets were every bit as chaotic as before. No one seemed to care that a quadruple homicide had just taken place in the drowning comet. Bodies piled up often in these lawless corners. Logan made his way down an alley behind the bar, with a stench of garbage, rotten food, and spilled chemicals assaulted his nostrils. He found a quiet spot beneath a flickering light and let out a long breath. Blood trickled from a burn on his arm where a near-miss plasma bolt had grazed him. He winced as he rolled back his jacket sleeve, revealing scarred skin beneath. With practiced efficiency, he unlatched a small compartment in the belt buckle, withdrawing a self-sterilizing bandage patch. He slapped it over the burn, waiting for the analgesic to numb the pain. As he watched it seal, his mind drifted back years to when that belt had been just a standard-issue harness for Terran Special Forces. He still remembered the day he first discovered what the Confederation's top brass was truly up to. There had been rumors, entire colonies disappearing, people herded onto transports in the dead of night. The official statements claimed they were volunteers heading for new frontiers, but Logan's unit found evidence of forced labor camps, slavery, organ harvesting. He vividly recalled the labyrinthine halls of an abandoned facility, rows of cages and half-completed vivisections. Men, women, even children used as living organ banks for the wealthy. When he tried to blow the whistle, the chain of command told him to stand down. But his conscience wouldn't let him. He and a handful of comrades went rogue, determined to bring the operation to light. Most of them paid with their lives. One by one, each friend he lost was commemorated by an upgrade to the belt. Sasha had specialized in energy shields. She gave him the blueprint for the reflective barrier that had just saved him from that plasma bolt. Darius had been a genius with advanced ballistic engineering. He built the micro-railgun now folded behind the belt's rear plating. Others contributed hacking modules, gravitic tethers, or chemical dispensers. By the end, the belt was no longer standard issue. It had become a miniature arsenal, a living shrine to his fallen squad. Just as the memory started to tighten his chest, a faint beep on his communicator snapped him back to the present. He tapped the device embedded in the belt's side. A holographic interface flickered to life, revealing a coded message. It was from a contact he'd cultivated on another outpost. Coordinates to a hidden station where a fresh convoy of human cargo was due for arrival. The message included a timestamp, less than 2 days from now. If he moved fast, he could intercept them, maybe free those prisoners, maybe put another dent in the slavers' operations. He exhaled, rubbing a hand across his unshaven jaw. A sense of grim purpose washed over him, banishing the lingering guilt that always flared up when he thought about his fallen friends. He couldn't bring them back, but he could save others from the same fate. His communicator beeped again, an urgent ping from somewhere close. He turned off the holo display, creeping to the alley's mouth. Across the street, a black hover truck had arrived, loaded with more mercenaries, 8 or 9 from the look of it. They wore ballistic armor, brandished high-caliber rifles. A quick glance at their insignias confirmed these guys were from a private security force rumored to be in the pockets of big players who enjoyed enslaving less profitable species. It wasn't surprising they'd show up so quickly after the Zalorians died. The entire district was probably abuzz with the possibility of collecting the huge bounty on Logan's head. He spotted a battered old cargo skiff parked behind them. Could be useful. If he took them out quickly, he might swipe that skiff and skip town. Logan weighed his options. The easiest route was to cut through them with his belt's monofilament blade, but that would make a scene. Then again, quiet infiltration had never really been his style. He unlatched the belt. In a fluid, whisper-quiet motion, he pressed a sequence of buttons along its underside. The belt separated into 4 metallic segments, each one sprouting small thrusters and rotating blades. They hovered around him like mechanical hornets, scanning for targets. He'd programmed a subroutine that captured everything he'd learned from close-quarters battles. Without hesitation, the 4 miniature drones shot forward. The mercenaries barely had time to react. The first drone tore through the skull of the lead man, leaving a crater of bone and gray matter. A second drone circled behind them, ripping into the truck's power core with a screech of metal. Sparks showered, and the vehicle's engine block erupted in flames, forcing 3 mercs to dive for cover. The third and fourth drones wove through the chaos, each unleashing a hail of plasma micro-rounds. In seconds, The entire ambush squad lay in a crumpled mess, their ballistic armor shredded like cheap cloth. Logan whistled softly, recalling the drones. They reassembled around his waist, reforming the belt with a series of mechanical clicks. The stench of burnt flesh hung in the air, drifting amid the acrid smoke from the wrecked hover truck. He stepped over a dying mercenary who tried to raise his pistol with trembling fingers. Logan kicked it aside and said nothing. The man's eyes glazed over, life snuffed out with the last ragged breath. Overhead, distant sirens or alarm klaxons signaled that local security might finally be stirring. Logan rummaged through the dead men's pockets until he found a passcode chip for the cargo skiff. Then he ran to the small vessel, opened the cockpit, and powered it up. The engine whined in protest, but eventually settled into a rhythmic hum. Perfect. He checked the readouts. Enough fuel to make a short FTL hop, hopefully enough to reach the hidden station from a message. As the skiff rose from the ground, Logan caught his reflection in the cracked windshield. A man with tired eyes, wearing a belt that hissed with faint arcs of energy, stared back at him. He gave a half-snort, pulling the flight harness around his chest. Then he guided the skiff up, over the rooftops of Naraka Outpost, into the swirling smog. Behind him, neon lights and alarm sirens faded into the background. He set a course for the starport gates. An hour later, the cargo skiff soared through the upper atmosphere, pushing against the planet's gravitational pull. Logan flicked the NAV console, inputting the coordinates gleaned from the coded message. He had about 36 hours to intercept the convoy. Enough time to plan. He forced himself to swallow down the gnawing ache in his stomach. The same guilt-laced tension always arose whenever he thought about staging a rescue. He wanted to save them all, but experience taught him that even a single misstep could lead to more death. People pinned too many hopes on him, expecting some unstoppable hero. But he was just one man with a belt, albeit a damn special belt. He fell into a restless doze once the autopilot engaged. In his dreams, he heard the screams from that wretched facility again, saw the flickering overhead lights illuminate cages stacked with terrified prisoners. His old commanding officer's voice echoed, "Stand down, soldier. This goes above your pay grade." He saw Sasha's face, pale and blood-soaked, lips silently mouthing, "Run." Another memory of the day he'd lost Darius, pinned under rubble while a council gunship strafed them from above. Each face returned, tormenting him with condemnation or sorrow. He jolted awake to the beeping of the NAV system. The skiff was dropping out of FTL near an old mining station that drifted on the edge of a swirling pink nebula. The structure was half-collapsed, lacking standard docking arms, but sensor readings indicated recent activity. Logan scanned for signs of life, picking up energy signatures from half a dozen ships, mostly mid-sized freighters. Perfect place to stash contraband and move illicit cargo. Guiding the skiff into a hidden approach vector, Logan killed the lights and let the thrusters idle. The station was a cluster of large metal cylinders connected by sealed passages. Unprotected cables dangled, and entire sections flickered with minimal power. It was the kind of place you'd expect pirates or slavers to use as a short-term hideout. He spotted a docking bay with multiple ships inside. With a careful thrust, he maneuvered the skiff close enough to latch onto the outer hull. Then he suited up in a battered oxygen mask, reconfigured the belt for infiltration, and stepped into the vacuum. The station's surface was pitted and scorched, proof of age and likely a few battles. Logan used the belt's magnetic clamp function to walk across the hull without floating away. He found a maintenance hatch, one that seemed rarely used. Perfect. Bypassing the electronic lock was almost trivial with the right tool, and soon he pried it open, slipping into the dark corridor beyond. Dim emergency lights illuminated swirling dust motes. He pressed his back against a wall, hearing distant footsteps that thudded in a regular patrol pattern. For all the advanced weaponry these criminals liked to flaunt, their day-to-day security was often sloppy. He tapped a button on his belt, activating a hush field that dulled the sound of his movements. Step by silent step, he eased down the corridor until he reached a vantage point over a massive cargo bay. Below, he saw rows of cages. His jaw clenched. Each cage held multiple humans, ragged, starved, some barely conscious. He recognized men, women, and even children huddled together. A trio of uniformed guards marched along the perimeter, occasionally banging on the bars with batons. A line of shackled captives were being herded down a ramp from a recently arrived freighter. Despite his steeled composure, Logan felt a flash of raw hatred. He scanned the catwalks. There were security cameras here and there, plus a posted guard near a control panel. The control panel likely operated the electromagnetic locks on the cages. As he watched, one guard entered sequence, and an overhead crane dragged one cage aside, clearing space for another. He'd have to move fast if he was to free them. A plan formed in his mind. He'd eliminate the catwalk guard, seize the control panel, open the cages. He'd use the belt's built-in coded override to sabotage the station's power, blocking the alarm from summoning reinforcements. Then, he'd lead the prisoners to one of the freighters in the docking bay, secure an escape route. Simple in theory, but he knew that hostiles lurked in every corner. He pressed a hidden button along the belt side. A small device about the size of a coin popped out into his palm. He armed it with a flick of his thumb and flung it silently toward the catwalk. Guard. The device stuck to the guard's boot, unnoticed. A second later, it emitted a brief pulse of sonic disruption. The guard had time for half a grunt before collapsing, unconscious. Logan hurried forward, slipping onto the catwalk. He grabbed the guard's passkey, then crouched over the control panel. Another belt tool slid into his hand, a compact data spike that extended a needle-like protrusion. He inserted it into the console, letting it hack the system. Lines of code flashed across the small display. Then an alarm klaxon wailed. Red lights flashed, and the cargo bay doors slammed shut in an automated lockdown. Logan cursed, yanking out the spike. The station's system had triggered a failsafe. Guards below shouted, raising weapons. A hail of bullets and energy beams tore through the air, pinging off the metal catwalk. Logan dropped to a prone position, pressing another sequence on the belt. Panels shifted, revealing a circular disc that sprang forth. He flung it over the railing, and it expanded midair into a portable shield generator that slammed onto the floor below. A bright dome of shimmering energy enveloped the area around the cages, providing a temporary sanctuary from gunfire. The slavers cursed as they realized their bullets were bouncing off the dome, and the imprisoned humans stared in confusion, half terrified, half hopeful. One guard tried throwing a plasma grenade at the shield, but it fizzled and rolled harmlessly aside. Logan rose from the catwalk, activating the monofilament whip mode. He flicked it outward, and the whip latched onto a steel beam overhead. In a single, graceful arc, he swung down onto the cargo bay floor. He landed behind a stack of shipping crates. Blaster fire hammered the crates, scattering molten shards. He peeked around and lobbed a handful of microgrenades. They detonated in a chain reaction, releasing a torrent of shrapnel that cut down at least 4 slavers. Screams filled the bay as bits of metal lodged in exposed flesh. Another guard tried to sprint toward an exit, but Logan flicked the whip again, catching the man by the ankle and yanking him off his feet. A quick retraction sliced the guard in two, leaving a smear of gore on the floor. "Fall back," shouted a particularly tall slaver wearing gilded armor, probably the local boss. He brandished an energy lance and fired a beam that carved a glowing line across the crates. Logan dove away just in time, feeling the heat singe his hair. Behind him, the shield dome crackled, showing signs of strain. He needed to drop the entire station's power for a moment to reset the failsafe. That meant getting to the main control junction. But first, he had to handle the boss. With an angry bellow, the boss advanced, swinging the energy lance in wide, crackling arcs. Logan ducked onto the first swing, used the belt's gravitic tether to pull himself sideways, then lashed out with a monofilament whip. The slaver parried it with an armored gauntlet, sparks flaring where the whip's edge met the metallic surface. Their exchange was a whirlwind of slashes, thrusts, and deflections. Each time the boss swung, Logan danced away. Each time Logan flicked the whip, the boss blocked with uncanny reflexes. The two combatants circled each other, stepping over the corpses of lesser henchmen. From the corner of his eye, Logan saw more reinforcements pouring in. Time was short. He feigned a low strike, forcing the boss to block. Then, with his free hand, he tapped a hidden button on the belt. A micro railgun popped out near his right hip. He seized it, pressed the trigger, and unleashed a tungsten slug at point-blank range. The slug slammed into the boss's chest plate, shattering it with a horrid crunch, and emerged out the other side in a fountain of blood. The boss staggered, eyes wide in disbelief before collapsing to his knees. "Why you're just one man," he coughed. Logan scowled. "Doesn't take an army to kill slavers." He pressed the barrel against the boss's helmet and fired once more, silencing him for good. The body toppled, final breath lost in a death rattle. Rising to his full height, Logan spun, searching for any remaining threats. Most of the guards had either fled or been cut down in the crossfire. The surviving prisoners were still behind the failing shield, gazing at him through the shimmering barrier. Their faces were bruised and hollow, but a faint hope glimmered in their eyes. Logan sprinted to the nearest security console. The code was scrambled, so he jammed the data spike in again, manually overriding the locks. With a sudden flicker, all the station's lights went out. Then the emergency lights blinked back on. The alarm klaxon fell silent. The shield dome stabilized momentarily. Logan slammed his fist on the open cage command. One by one, the electromagnetic locks on the cages clicked, and the doors swung wide. Dozens of prisoners hesitated, fear still in their eyes. Logan gestured urgently. "Go! Get out of there!" They poured out in a confused, desperate mass. Some had to drag unconscious comrades behind them. Logan pointed toward an exit corridor. "There's a hangar with ships. Find one that looks fueled. I'll cover you." But as they started moving, a new thunderous rumble echoed through the cargo bay. The entire station quaked. Overhead, beams groaned. An external security door was forced open from the outside, letting in a squad of heavily armored troopers. They wore glossy black suits with the insignia of a major paramilitary faction that thrived on the slave trade. Their leader stepped forward, voice booming through an external speaker. "Logan Mercer, stand down, or these people die." In response, Logan whipped out the belt drones again. They hovered menacingly at his side. The trooper commander sneered behind the visor. "We'll kill the lot of you if we must." "Then you'll have to kill me first," Logan growled. They opened fire. Plasma bolts screamed across the bay. Some of the freed prisoners shrieked and huddled behind crates. Logan rushed forward, drones swirling around him, each returning fire with microblasts. The troopers advanced methodically, their black suits absorbing glancing blows. One drone got blasted to bits by an especially strong plasma cannon. Logan gritted his teeth. That had been the piece carrying Talia's code imprint. Another comrade's memory destroyed. He pressed on, fueling his rage into precise attacks. The belt reconfigured again, this time into a short-range pulse emitter. He squeezed the trigger, and an invisible shockwave rippled through the air, knocking several troopers off their feet. Their armor short-circuited, leaving them vulnerable. In a heartbeat, Logan drew the monofilament wire and swept it across their exposed necks. Sparks and blood. Screams. Behind him, two more troopers zeroed in with rifles locked on his spine. He sensed them too late to dodge. The rifles barked, spitting lethal slugs. Logan's belt automatically deployed the reactive shield, but the force knocked him forward, pain lancing through his shoulder. He tumbled to the ground, vision swimming. A battered prisoner hurled a loose pipe at one of the troopers, creating a momentary distraction. Logan clutched his belt, inputting a new sequence. The belt hissed, exuding a fine mist. The troopers advanced, ignoring the prisoner with the pipe, focusing on Logan. "He's down. Move in." As they closed the distance, the mist enveloped them. Instantly, their black armor began corroding, eaten away by a powerful acidic vapor. They stumbled back, howling, as the chemical agent devoured metal and flesh alike. One trooper managed a strangled cry before collapsing in a sizzling heap. "Go!" Logan rasped to the prisoners. "Run!" They obeyed, streaming into the corridors. Logan forced himself up, ignoring the protests of his bruised ribs. More troopers could be heard in the distance. This wasn't a fight he could sustain indefinitely. With a snarl, he reattached the belt in standard form around his waist and bolted after the freed prisoners. The station's corridors were a maze of flickering lights and drifting smoke. The path to the hangar led them through a half-collapsed passage. Overhead, the sound of metal rending suggested structural integrity was close to failing. Logan had to hope it stayed intact long enough for them to escape. At the hangar bay, they found a row of ships in various states of disrepair. A few were freighters, a couple small shuttles. Panicked men and women scrambled aboard whatever looked functional, while Logan tried to keep watch. Then more troopers burst in from a side entrance. "Stop them!" the squad leader yelled, raising a massive railgun. Logan sprinted across an open gap, monofilament whip in hand. The railgun boomed, and a tungsten slug soared. He twisted, activating the time dilation shield. For an instant, the slug seemed to freeze in midair, spinning rapidly in shimmering static. Then it reversed course, smashing back into the squad leader, ripping through the man's torso in a spatter of gore. The squad leader's eyes widened in disbelief as he fell. The other troopers hesitated, seeing their commander's fate. That pause was all Logan needed. He summoned his remaining drones, each spitting lethal rounds. By the time the troopers managed to fire back, half their number had been shredded. The survivors retreated down the corridor in disarray. Logan turned to the freed prisoners. Many had already boarded a battered old freighter, which was now powering up its engines with a deafening roar. A trio of men beckoned from the hatch. "Come on," they yelled. But Logan shook his head, scanning the hangar. "Go. I'll find another ship." He knew the ones here might be too crowded for him to maneuver, or might need a pilot with specialized codes. The best chance for them was to run, no matter who they left behind. He recognized the fear and desperation in their eyes, so reminiscent of the look his squad had once shared. The freighter lifted off unsteadily, thrusters trembling. Logan shot a grappling line onto a smaller vessel that read Celestra's wing across its hull. He reeled himself over and jumped inside the open cargo ramp. The cockpit was a dusty mess, but it lit up when he slammed the passkey into the console. Its reactors hummed to life. He cast one last glance out the cockpit window. The freed captive's freighter was sliding out of the hangar, the airlock doors grinding open. Despite the distant echo of more enemies arriving, they managed to slip into the void. Good, he thought. Let them have that shred of hope. Now, time to cover the escape. Logan angled Celestra's wing to face the corridor where the troopers had retreated. He toggled the belt's interface to link with the ship's weapon system. The belt's advanced targeting module integrated seamlessly with the vessel's lower cannons, giving him near-instant firing solutions. A horde of black-armored soldiers poured into the hangar, rocket launchers and heavy blasters aimed at the fleeing ships. Logan squeezed the triggers, unleashing twin beams of plasma that carved a molten swath across the hangar floor. Metal erupted in a fiery spray. Troopers incinerated where they stood. He fired again, ensuring none survived to take potshots at the escaping freighter. Then Celestra's wing lurched as the station's entire structure groaned. Explosions from deeper inside rocked the place. Flames licked across the door frames. A chunk of ceiling collapsed onto a parked shuttle, crushing it. Logan realized the station was moments from total implosion. "Let's see if you can fly, old girl," he muttered, punching the throttle. The vessel surged forward, out through the ragged hangar doors, into open space. Debris tumbled in every direction. The stolen cargo skiff he'd arrived and was nowhere to be seen, probably destroyed in the crossfire. Beyond the station, he spotted the large freighter carrying the rescued group. It limped away under heavy strain, but it was moving. Then, from above, a massive cruiser dropped out of FTL. Gunmetal gray, with the insignia of a known slave-trading syndicate. They must have come to collect their shipment, only to find Logan had ruined everything. A volley of green-hued lasers streaked from the cruiser's turrets, peppering the station's hull. Some shots angled toward the fleeing freighter. Logan clenched his jaw, refusing to let it end here. He hammered the controls, diving Celestra's wing in front of the beam. The shields flared, absorbing most of the blast. The entire cockpit rattled, warning lights screaming. He had only one desperate idea left. He tapped the belt. A portion of it detached, a small sphere with swirling purple lights. The wormhole device, an insane piece of tech salvage from a derelict Archon ship. It could open a temporary rift in space, swallowing nearby objects. Last time he'd used it, half a pirate fleet vanished, but he nearly lost himself in the singularity's pull. No better time than now. He locked the device into the wing's forward launcher, aligning the shot. Missing section where Talia's drone had been obliterated. Another piece of his team's legacy gone. He closed his eyes. Yet, despite the losses, he'd freed those people. He'd kept them from the horror of organ harvesting labs and forced labor. He'd gained a measure of victory, however small, against the darkness that haunted the galaxy. In the quiet hum of hyperspace, with only the wing's console lights flickering around him, Logan recalled the fear on those troopers' faces when they saw the belt in action. They thought a human with no visible gun would be easy prey. They hadn't realized that sometimes the simplest item, like a belt, could hide unimaginable power. If only the rest of the galaxy understood that humans, too, had depths they barely guessed at. He inhaled and exhaled, letting the momentary calm wash away the stench of blood and the roar of combat. As the wing's autopilot handled navigation, he rose from the chair, rummaged through a first aid kit to properly treat his wounds. He splashed water on his face in the cramped lavatory, staring into the mirror at the dark circles under his eyes. Then he returned to the cockpit, belt slung over one shoulder. A beep indicated an incoming transmission. Probably some bounty hunter or opportunistic scum scanning for easy marks. He ignored it. He wasn't in the mood for more violence tonight. Another beep. This time, a partial text message scrolled across the console. Logan Mercer is to be considered extremely dangerous. Bounty updated. 900 million credits. Approach with caution. He scoffed. The price on his head was creeping ever higher. It had yet to break the rumored billion mark, but at this rate, it wouldn't be long. He tapped the console, deleting the message. In the swirling corridor of FTL travel, Logan let his eyes drift shut, belt cradled against his chest. He still had work to do. There were entire networks of slavers out there. The council, syndicates, paramilitary factions. All of them profited from suffering. As long as they existed, he wouldn't stop fighting. He'd find them, sabotage them, annihilate them one by one if necessary. From some hidden corner of the galaxy, new bounty hunters were gearing up, new warlords forging alliances, maybe even entire fleets mobilizing. They all believed they could kill the human who dared stand in their way. Perhaps they thought that without a rifle or a sword strapped visibly across his back, he was harmless. Logan wondered how many more times he'd have to prove them wrong. How many more bodies would fill the corners of space before they finally learned. In the end, he decided it didn't matter. So long as innocents were being sold like cattle, he would remain the galaxy's worst nightmare for anyone involved. The belt was more than a weapon. It was the memory of everyone he'd lost and the power to break any chain that shackled the weak. Emerging from hyperspace near a remote gas giant, Logan aimed the wing's scanners at a safe harbor, a small colony rumored to be friendly to fugitives. He needed to rest, repair the belt's damaged drone module, and gather intel on the next target. When the ship touched down on a lonely landing pad under a swirling orange sky, Logan took a moment at the threshold. He fastened the belt back around his waist, feeling the comforting weight and hum of power. The cargo ramp lowered with a hiss, letting in a gust of dusty wind. Stepping onto the pad, he noticed a couple of local dock workers who stared, uncertain if they should greet him or run. He gave them a curt nod, trying not to look too intimidating. "Just need refuel and repairs," he said. "You can name your price." They nodded, not daring to question him. As he moved past them, he saw the wariness in their eyes. Maybe they recognized his face from a bounty board. Maybe they sensed the faint aura of violence that clung to him like a second skin. Regardless, they left him alone. At the nearest scrap metal kiosk, Logan negotiated for parts and a quiet place to work. The kiosk owner led him to a dingy workshop behind a row of old Starship engines. Tools were scattered everywhere. Logan laid out the belt, carefully detaching the segments that formed Talia's old drone. He removed the charred circuit boards, searching for salvageable pieces. In the flickering overhead lamp, each piece of the belt told a story. The shield generator from Sasha, the micro railgun from Darius, the infiltration tools from Quinn. He'd integrated them all in memory of the friends who had taught him these skills. Talia's drone module was beyond repair. All that remained was a small data crystal with her signature code. His throat tightened. Losing them had been too high a price, but he could at least keep the spirit of her design alive. He began rebuilding the segment with new components from kiosk. Wires, thrusters, a miniature CPU. He had no illusions that it would be the same, but it would function, and in time, it would be part of the unstoppable arsenal he carried everywhere. Hours passed. At some point, the kiosk owner peered in, offering a can of cheap protein brew. Logan gratefully accepted it, downing the bitter liquid with a wince. Finally, the new drone sat on the table, humming softly. He set it into place on the belt, verifying the connections. A faint glow pulsed along the edges, indicating readiness. He latched the belt around his waist again, giving it a careful test flick. The drone detached, hovered, and reattached seamlessly. Good. He walked outside, into the endless twilight of the planet's dusty horizon. The gas giant above loomed, swirling with orange and gold storms. The battered silhouette of Celestra's wing was visible, newly patched and fueled. He knew that beyond these quiet skies lay a galaxy full of enemies who'd stop at nothing to claim the price on his head. He pulled up a data feed from the belt's communicator. Sure enough, local net buzzed with rumors. Sightings of Logan Mercer, outpost bars turned into bloodbaths, entire fleets lost to mysterious anomalies. Some called him a menace. Others whispered he might be the only being brazen enough to challenge the entire slave economy. In a side article, he spotted the same official council broadcast, urging all citizens to report if they saw him. There was a mention of a rumored new bounty hunter named Orion, someone reputedly so precise and lethal that they'd never failed a contract. Probably just another name he'd end up adding to the list of the dead. He left the kiosk behind, heading toward the wing. Several onlookers parted ways for him, unsure if they should thank or fear him. He reached the starship's ramp, pausing to look back at the handful of watchers. They quickly averted their gazes, busying themselves with whatever tasks they had. Boarding the ship, Logan sealed the hatch, took the pilot's seat, and fired up the engines. The belt hummed, a comforting reminder that he wasn't alone in his mission. Inside every microcircuit and etched plating was a piece of his fallen team, and the vow he'd made to them, to tear down the slaver's empire, no matter how many systems he had to burn in the process. As the wing rose on thrusters, dust swirling underneath, he set a course to the next sector on his mental list. He'd gleaned fresh intel from the kiosk's net feed about a rumored processing center hidden on a dead moon. Possibly more victims were held there. Possibly more slavers, more mercenaries, more monstrous technology. Good. His lips curved into a grim smile. He was going to find them all, belt in hand, and show them exactly how wrong they were to assume a single unarmed human could make a difference. Sometimes that was all it took, one man with a belt forged by love and loss to become the biggest threat in the galaxy.